Well, now we're getting to some of the key passages in the later part of the New Testament that seem at first glance to bar women from leadership, or at least some forms of leadership within the church. I've become more and more convinced over the years that that's not at all what Paul is talking about. And we're going to look at a big one today, 1 Timothy chapter 2. It centers around the phrase, should women be able to teach and have authority over men? 1 Timothy chapter 2. First of all then, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. This is good, and it is pleasing in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. For there is one God, and there is one mediator between God and man, the man Jesus Christ, who gave himself as a ransom for all, which is the testimony given at the proper time. For this I was appointed a preacher and an apostle. I'm telling the truth, I'm not lying, a teacher of the Gentiles in faith and truth. I desire then that in every place the men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. Likewise also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair or gold and pearls and costly attire, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness, with good works. Let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. Yet she will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith and love and holiness with self-control. So we're going to focus in on this second half, but the beginning of chapter 2 gives some important context here. Specifically focusing in on this passage around women. What is Paul saying to the women in the church? And this has often been used from multiple sides, and it's a really kind of a difficult passage for a lot of us to understand. I've spent many hours, many years digging into this passage in particular. First, a lot of what he says is perfectly reasonable, and we should, in all eras, continue to live like this. He's talking about how do we live in relationship with the rulers over us, with the world, with Jesus himself. How do men operate in the world, and how do women? Right here, women should adorn themselves in respectful apparel. I actually think it's kind of like, to re-paraphrase what he's saying here. He's saying, I want women to adorn themselves respectfully. Now, I'm not talking about what you wear, gold, pearls, costly attire. It's almost like he's tossing those aside. He's like, look, I'm not even talking about that. What I'm talking about is adorning yourself with what is proper for women who profess godliness, with good works. All dresses and jewelry aside, like godliness and good works is what makes a woman beautiful, is what he's saying, which is true in every era, no matter what we're wearing. Okay, so there's that. But then he gets to the stickier part. Starting in at verse 11. What do we do here? Let the women learn quietly, with all submissiveness. I do not permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. Okay. There's a couple things I'd like to say here. One, this whole section, there is one command. The imperative form of the verb only shows up once, and it's right here. Let a woman learn. Everything else actually flows out of that command. Let the women learn. And then he gives some descriptions. What is he talking about? Well, I want them to learn quietly with all submissiveness. There's literally nothing wrong with that phrase. That's how every student learns. No one, I don't go into my seminary classes or undergrad degree classes or any class being unruly and interrupting my teacher. That's how I teach my kids. We want them to learn quietly with submissiveness. That's just respectful learning. He actually uses this exact same word earlier. This is why I put the whole thing in here. When he's praying for all of us that we may live peaceful and quiet lives, he uses the same word, right? So it's already a verb that, or an adjective that he's already applied to all Christians, applying it here. So there's nothing wrong with that. The harder part, obviously, is this. I do not permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. What is he talking about here? there's a big clue that I'm going to dive into this word authority for a little bit. So there's a common word every other time in the New Testament. This word, the word authority, when it shows up, is the word exousia. I'm not even going to try to write it right now, but it's the word exousia in the Greek, and that is rightfully given, God-given, structurally given authority. So the way that we would say the police have authority to execute the law. Or when Jesus is teaching and they say, wow, he has authority, not like the scribes. He speaks as one with authority. Or when he takes authority over the demons and he tells them to leave, right? So exousia is the word for authority all throughout. Paul this is the only time he uses it. He uses a different word here. Authentein. And authentein does not mean authority. So I take issue with the ESV here. Other translations have opted for something like control or undue authority. It has a sense of authority, but it's more of a domineering authority. Actually, in some contexts in the ancient world, this is the only time it's used in the New Testament, but when it shows up in other ancient Greek texts, it has almost like sexual overtones, almost like what today we would have like dominating, dominatrix type imagery. It's used in other places to actually mean taking authority in the sense of actually taking somebody's life. And so it has this control, undue authority, domination type of idea, which sounds a lot more like undue authority. You're taking authority that was not given, that you do not have. And so to take a step back, he's not talking at all about rightfully given authority. He's talking about a scenario where if a woman oversteps her current level of authority and tries to exert that authority over a man or really over anyone, that's not allowed. Right? That's what's going on here. This word authentein really is the clue for me that he's talking about something completely different. So he says, look, again, going back to let the women learn, don't let them take undue authority, and continue to learn quietly. Okay. Then he goes into, this is another weird thing. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. Well, in other places, he's able to put all the blame on Adam, like in Romans, for example, when Romans 5, 6, when he's talking about how sin entered the world through one man, he clearly is using, so in different scenarios, he's going to put Eve or Adam in the driver's seat, and there's a particular reason why he's putting Eve in the driver's seat here. And it seems particularly what triggered this for him was this idea of Eve being deceived. Adam wasn't deceived, but if you go back to Genesis, that doesn't let him off the hook. He was just in full rebellion, because if he wasn't deceived, he was still rebelling against God's command. Eve was deceived by the serpent. And so he's bringing in this image here because there's something about the women learning and not overstepping their authority that Paul is latching onto. So he's saying, hey, deception is a really important thing for us to stamp out. We need to let the women learn so that they can't be deceived. Okay. And I'm going to save verse 15 till the end because there's some other perplexities there. But what's going on in just this verse 11 through 14? Let's take a step back, and the context of Timothy might come into play here. So Timothy was leading the church in Ephesus. And in Ephesus, there's a couple key things. One, there's a huge cult to Artemis. So within this cult of Artemis, it was a very female-driven religion. Women could be priestesses, and there were a whole bunch of rituals we don't have to go into, but Artemis was a goddess who was the goddess of the hunt. She was also the goddess of fertility, which I think actually bears on verse 15. We'll cover that in a little bit. But the main thing I just want to emphasize, and there's more, but the fact that prominent women would have been leading in the cult of Artemis. And if I'm trying to put together, one of the things that sometimes we have to do, especially with really tricky passages in the Bible, is try to piece together, so what was going on? This is a letter, and we don't have the other side of the conversation. So we're listening in on one side of a phone call, and we don't know what the other person has said or is saying. And Paul is assuming things that Timothy and the church in Ephesus would have already understood. And so sometimes we have to put some pieces together, make some educated guesses. But if you see, okay, down the street is a huge temple to the goddess Artemis, where women are prominent leaders in that church, in that religion, what might be going on here? I could put those two together and say, okay, well, what if there are some of those women have been now converted to Christianity, coming in and assuming, maybe wrongfully, that their status in the cult of Artemis gives them de facto status in this church of Jesus. So there's something wrong here with the fact that apparently the women were not being allowed to learn. I don't know what that was all about. Maybe there were a group of men trying to clamp down and saying, no, they're not allowed to come into Bible study. They're not allowed to go to seminary or whatever the equivalent then. So Paul has to come in with a command, say, no, you need to let them learn. And I don't just let women to come in and grab undue authority. He's not actually talking about exousia. Again, he's not talking about rightfully given authority. He's talking about authentein authority. But rather, she should learn. I think the assumption, as I read this, is once she has learned, there's nothing to stop God from giving her real authority, exousia, but authentein, control, undue authority, domination, is never allowed. And so they need to not be unruly. They need to learn, and men, you need to let them learn. And they can't just come in and railroad over the rightfully given authority structures in the church. And maybe there's something to do with the fact that down the street there was a very female-driven religion going on here. Okay, so there's something about that going on here. And then she will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness. This poses some questions for a lot of folks. One, the fact that Paul uses the word saved, and right away we could say the word saved is more of a generic term. In Christianity, in the church today, we typically only use it to mean, saved by grace so that we can be with God when we die, that kind of salvation idea. But the word saved also just means saved from a calamity, saved from an illness. Saved can be used in all different ways. And so here, the easiest way to understand verse 15 is, again, back to the cult of Artemis. One of the main things Artemis was known for was people would pray to her when they were pregnant so that they could be saved through childbearing. Childbearing was a very dangerous thing. Many, many women died in the ancient world because they were pregnant. And so the women would go to Artemis, offer sacrifices, and pray, and Artemis would save them from dying in childbirth. And so Paul might just be aware. There's other ways of understanding this verse, but probably the easiest one is to say, so Paul's saying, hey, you don't have to go pray to Artemis. Pray to Jesus, and you can be saved through childbearing. He can actually save you better than Artemis can. So she will be saved through childbearing. It has nothing to do with religious salvation. It's about actual the turmoil of childbirth. So continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control. So don't take undue control. Don't take authentein over a man. And this passage then actually has nothing to say about real authority. It's addressing a completely different category, which in the category of the entire chapter is about how do we live in relationship with others. We live quiet, godly lives, dignified. We adorn ourselves with good works and godliness. We learn quietly like good, respectful students, and we continue in faith, love, and holiness. There's kind of a theme throughout this whole thing. He's not actually talking about authority structures in the church. Okay. Would love to hear some questions. I know I probably just scratched the surface. There's more that we could talk about here, but I think we'll stop there.